Our story today comes from Matthew chapter 16 and 17. Then Jesus told his disciples, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay everyone for what has been done. Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led him up to a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. The Gospel of the Lord. Please be seated. I can think of several examples off the top of my head of people whom I met for the first time and instantly got a strong impression of them. Maybe they said something really opinionated and I disagreed with them. Maybe they were very kind and thoughtful and generous. Or maybe I thought they were kind of an odd duck. So naturally, I have this image of who they are in my mind, and I kind of hold on to that. And when I see evidence that I'm right, I pay attention. And when I see evidence that I'm wrong, it's easy to dismiss. Honestly, I think we all do this. But as I get older, I have found that I'm often wrong to a certain degree. That people who I may be irritated with, who maybe didn't like me, could still actually be really good people. Amazing. And people whom I admired and got along with really well could still make big mistakes. Amazing, right? The point is, my perception is limited. Your perception is limited. What we think of as reality is just our limited perception in a world filtered through our personality and our culture and our life experience, etc. And you've heard me say this before, but I think it's worth repeating. And changing our perception is really, really hard. It means admitting that we might have been wrong about a person or an idea or a situation. It means opening ourselves up to something that we might have been closed to before, and that can be very scary. Now we read about Jesus going up to the mountaintop and he changes. He starts to shine and glow and he's transfigured, and to top it off, the 2 most significant Old Testament characters to the Jewish people, Elijah and Moses, show up and start chatting with Jesus. Peter, James, and John are there, and they represent us, our human perception, which is, as I mentioned, limited and sometimes wrong. So in that moment, Peter and James and John are overwhelmed and afraid, and they think, "This is it, the kingdom of God is coming. We will make concrete this experience by building 3 tents." Today, let's be honest, we would whip out our phones and try to take a picture of Jesus, Moses, and Elijah behind us, put it on Facebook with a caption that said, "Do you see what I'm seeing? #Jesus is awesome." We think this moment shows Jesus for who he really is, that he's equal to Moses and Elijah, and he's about to do something really big and important. And to top it off, God's voice says, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." And then it's all gone. They're alone. No more shining, no more prophets from the past, no more voice. Back to reality. And maybe Peter and James and John expected Jesus to show the world who he was, to be the Messiah and prove himself. Everything was going to change. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. Our eyes can deceive us. Our perceptions can be wrong. We see Jesus transfigured on the mountain or walking on the water or feeding 5,000 people and healing a leper, and we think that Jesus is powerful and special, and we think we understand what that means, but we're wrong. And we dismiss any contradictory evidence, such as Jesus warning the disciples about hardship, Jesus talking about serving and being humble, and the very thing he said 6 days before the event on the mountain, if you want to be my disciples, take up your cross and follow me. That you have to lose yourself to find yourself. Because in trying to save yourself, you're only going to lose yourself. Well, that makes no sense, and it's not fun, so let's focus on the shiny Jesus, the miracle Jesus, the glory Jesus. But here's the thing. When Jesus is on the mountaintop being transfigured, it is, yes, an insight into his divinity. But Jesus tells the disciples not to tell anyone what they've seen on the mountain because he knows everybody will get the wrong impression. Because we humans assume that holiness and divinity means power and glory and privilege and all sorts of human concoctions we've imposed upon God, and we're wrong. Jesus tells us and shows us that we don't know what we're talking about. See, that odd line about us losing ourselves, if we're listening to Jesus, as God asks us to do, is actually really, really important. Because Jesus knows something about human nature that we don't always realize, namely that we're kind of lost in our own realities. We create ourselves, our lives, our purpose, and we create ideas of who other people are and how the world works, and we weave it into this reality that isn't totally real. A reality that divides people into good and bad, friend, believer, unbeliever, bully, victim, black, white. And our life that we value so much is really just our perception of who we are in a world that we think we've figured out. And we're wrong. You know, we're like a horse that used to have the blinders on to keep it going in one direction. We're like a blind man who, when they grab onto the trunk of an elephant, thinks an elephant must be a snake. We get trapped. And we hurt others, and we get hurt because we don't see the big picture, and our egos are fragile. And the life we cling to so terribly isn't really life, and it's not life-giving. In fact, Jesus proves this to us, doesn't he? When God lets us have our own way, when we think we're right and we know who the enemy is, and we think we're protecting our tribe and our religious beliefs and our God, we end up putting people on the cross. We put Jesus on the cross. We cling to our life and our reality, and we kill Jesus. So our life is death all the time. Jesus knows that. This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him. Jesus tells us we need to lose our life, lose ourselves, lose our firm grip on power and control and privilege and being right and thinking we have it all figured out, and let it die on the cross. Let ourselves fall to the ground. Open our eyes and see that reality is bigger than what we thought it was. That Jesus is divine, shining on the mountain, and he still washes people's dirty feet, kisses lepers, and lets himself be beaten and killed without defending himself. It's a paradox, one that we don't get. So the cross is a constant reminder that we as humans get it wrong. The cross tells us we don't fully understand God. The cross shows us that we cannot follow Jesus and call ourselves Christians unless we're willing to put to death our control and our power, the very construction we call ourselves. And when we do, we find something amazing on the other side. We discover day after day that reality and life and God and love are deep and wide and wonderful, revealing themselves in new ways over and over again that we almost missed. The very joy of being, the freedom of true life, the abundance of living was almost lost on us because we didn't want to let go. When you let go of yourself, you find life. It's a spiritual truth. Jesus tells us this in all kinds of ways. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. He knows what he's talking about. It's easy for us to praise Jesus. It's a lot harder to listen to him and let him shake up our reality. It's easy to be a Christian if you just have to assent to a certain amount of beliefs. It's harder to actually follow the path of love and service and humility and transformation. But that's why we go to church. We practice and we remind each other and we help each other along and we make mistakes and we get lost in ourselves and we're called back and we practice forgiveness and reconciliation. One of my favorite examples of a person who got this whole concept was St. Francis of Assisi. He grew up as a wealthy merchant's son in a time of the land in Italy when there was lots of local feuds going on between the cities, as well as, of course, the national campaigns of the Crusades. But after recovering from a very serious illness and having a vision of Jesus, St. Francis realized that the problems of this world came from people in the church who were trying to hold on to 3 Ps: power, privilege, and possessions. So he decided to give away everything he owned and become basically a beggar. And when others started to follow him, when they liked his idea and found meaning in it, he was urged to create an order of monks, and yet he refused to call himself father, as most starters of an order would, and insisted on being called Brother Francis, because he never wanted to be lured into any kind of power. Francis was a man whose entire reality had been challenged, and he allowed his perceptions to fall away. And he really started to beat to his own drum, maybe Jesus' drum. He even went in front of a crusading army and told them to stop and to go home. They laughed at him and they kept going. And he even visited a Muslim sultan for several days and had a deep spiritual conversation with him. Churches have undergone the cross as well. One particular church in Minneapolis was growing smaller and smaller and looking to close their doors. And in a moment of discerning, realizing they had nothing to lose, they decided that they would try something radical. They wanted to do a 6-month experiment where they would invite families to practice Sabbath. Because they knew from everybody who was left in their church that everybody was so busy and it was so crazy that there was no time for rest. And so they wanted their church to practice it. So once a month, they took the Sunday off. That's right. They gathered on a Saturday night for a potluck and prayer, and for the next 24 hours, they encouraged their families to do absolutely nothing. They could play, they could have free time, fun time, family time, friend time, but no obligations, no work. Through that 6-month experiment, they found new life and new identity and a new discipleship. This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him. So, my friends, this Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, the first day of our 40 days of Lent. It's a season when we ponder what it really actually means to be a disciple. And we question a culture of noise and busyness and power and privilege and possessions, all the things that clutter our ears and our brains and our spirits. It's a season where we take seriously the invitation to take up our crosses and follow Jesus. And we wonder, what does that actually mean for us? What wondrous love is this that we are invited to? Amen.